Evening, everyone. Welcome to another Tuesday train with the 2MK team. We are, as always, for Tuesdays playing Guilty Gear. Since last week, we have, as usual, not touched this game. Except me. I practiced like one combo for like 30 minutes. So you can be hyped for that, I guess. This week, however, we are trying to integrate stuff from our other games into our playstyles and ideas for this one. Overall, though, we're probably going to have a little more quiet on the stream itself, but more chat in stream chat. So feel free to join us there, or feel free to join us in the lounge itself, as it is open to another 5 players. Yeah. Similarly, if I seem to be hype in particular weird ways, it's because I was watching superficial food reviews with the Food Titan, Dame Drops. Shoutouts to Big Dame. So, with Omni Rabbit's current intention to stop a particular habitual wiggle in neutral, and Kanzuki Dynasty's intention to spend a lot more time watching particular movements in the game as a whole, we're likely to see another good matchup in terms of what people are learning, as one player is aiming to move less in particular situations, and the other is aiming to measure distances and calm down as a result. With the main setups required for both of these characters, it's likely to also lead to a bit more defensive play on both sides, as it's harder to get certain confirms and get bigger damage with these mindsets in question. So we're much more likely to see relative battles of attrition, at least between these two today. The faster that one can, as a player, learn to recognize your opponent's exact position from you, the faster you can decide what you're going for, and most likely what they're going to try for, especially if they have automatic responses of their own to specific spaces. However, it's best to pick up this information from a lot of different players of the same character. So you should actually focus your efforts on consciously recognizing the spacings, as this is one of the most important but difficult to actually manage things in fighting games. We have a tendency as players to learn to, again, autopilot, to hit certain things because the opponent is X distance away, and we can end up doing this with barely any thought behind it at all. When it's a punish, this is fine. For punishes, you can absolutely learn the exact spacing where this combo needs to be used versus this other combo, and everything's fine there. But when you're playing neutral, you might want to just focus on recognizing the situation so that you can change what you do during it for various reasons. Similarly, you can at least feel good even when you've failed to do the correct combo for whatever reason, if you were absolutely sure of what you were doing. Your awareness and recognition speed can always help regardless of how good your opponent is, as this helps you make decisions based on things that happen rather than immediately spending a lot of time trying to catch up, having to discard the interaction you had and move on to another one. A long chain of interactions you can't remember does not help you learn anything. While it can therefore be to your advantage to try to keep your opponent on their toes and move around more, a lot of this is still about understanding your own movement well enough to gain something out of it. High awareness makes it much easier to maneuver around an opponent whose defense is based on spacing themselves differently, as they must constantly have at least the same level of awareness as you do. Or, at least with trickier characters, they can be baited into having reactions that suit your purposes instead of theirs. Games with more options require more awareness of all sorts of things, which makes it challenging for beginners at first, especially if they're playing against people who are better even in terms of just awareness. And since awareness does not always require that one plays a lot, sometimes just having the knowledge of how things work is enough to translate into playing ability. A highly aware player can more easily convert advice into results. To the point where the highest level of players are so aware that it's almost as if they're playing a different game than even mid-level players altogether. And even though many of them do practice quite a lot, there does come a point where certain forms of practice are just there to keep sharp and make sure that when you do recognize something you want to change in a matchup, that you can just do it on demand without feeling as if you might not be able to execute it. The awareness of your opponent's expectations are required so that you can violate them. This is something you're also more likely to see improving as the team works more with the Dragon Ball FighterZ bot, as that game is much more about awareness issues than it is about execution ones or understanding frame data on specific aspects of it. Of course, spending extra time outmaneuvering your opponent is only really helpful if, because of whatever reason, they can't keep up. But when we say keep up, we don't necessarily just mean in terms of keep up with your movement. If they can keep up with you in terms of damage dealt, then it's not going to matter either way. This is one of our most important aspects in fighting games, to recognize when you're taking too many risks in your movement and your more damaging opponent is going to take advantage of that. Fortunately, if you are good enough at moving around your opponent in this game and landing some stray hits while you're at it, even if they're blocked, the result should be that you build up your tension gain rate faster than they can. And this in turn gives you more tools to use in the matchup with them. But of course you must be able to use it, either in confirms or the same source of reactions. A good example here is that my opponent is either forced or choosing to be much more defensive than I am. Meaning that my meter gain far surpasses theirs for most situations. Different ways of using that meter obviously are available, but just the threat of it also helps force them to take certain actions due to the different risks involved when Jam Super is available, for instance. Furthermore, meaning that even if you have difficulty actually executing it, if you're aware that this shift will make your opponent think differently, i.e. you have good enough execution, that they cannot tell outright whether or not you meant to do the super or something else you did, then you can use this to your advantage rather than getting frustrated about your execution. This is particularly helpful to beginner players who may have trouble getting what they want at particular times, as they don't have to reach 100%. It's also strong help when you have options that are not based on ending a combo with max damage, and spend more time learning to use your meter for positioning, punishes, and so on. Since you can drop a max damage combo you are relying on, and at that point, there's really nothing you can do. The damage is just gone. You probably got to keep the meter, but depending on how you drop the combo and what game you were playing, you may not have even that. In Guilty Gear in particular, you can think of this that way because the supers in this game are usually not invincible, but as a result, they have much more utility in a lot of situations. The few invincible short-range ones are often used as reversals, which is not the situation I'm discussing at the moment. Being able to use the super even as just pressure to build up more tension gauge, directly afterwards that is, means you can keep your opponent on their toes even more, and if you manage to use it once and have the tension gauge available to do it again in the same situation, choosing to not do it or failing to do it, depending on what else comes out, can still be beneficial to you. Alright, after a short dimensional hiccup, we might be back on track. Just probably a temporal space shift, these sort of things happen to Axel. However, if this game is a little overwhelming to you, you do have a very clear one of this you can look at. Whether or not Jam can finish that combo, should even do it, or starts it in a particular place, is related to her spacing relative to the opponent when the Crushing Heavy connects. At close range, she can always do that. At further ranges, you can't be as sure. Kai similarly has particular combos that come out of some of his crouching moves that should be done based on where the opponent is, which is what OmniRabbit has been working on in prior weeks. Trunks and Kai do have the same voice actor, right? Oh well. Similarly, how high the opponent is in the air when hit by his crouch heavy, along with one or two other things, further complicates the combo timing and spacing. Even more complex is that if this is the first hit of a combo, it acts a little differently than if it is a juggle or certain forms of a later hit. And to add on top of all of that, regardless of how you specifically choose to continue the combo, you do have to hit confirm to jump cancel. Most games with decent design will usually leave at least one easy button, i.e. sweep, knockdown, in this game Crouching Death for most characters, where if you are not confident in your ability to do a combo, or you don't feel as if you know the correct spacing for a particular one, you can just hit this one button and have it solve your problem, even if it's suboptimal damage. This is harder for a few situations where this is not the case and you can't get much out of it that way. Generally, characters are considered difficult or more stressful if they have no such optimization options. They don't have more complex combos. Whether or not the character is good or strong has more to do with how optimized and strong they are once those combos are in use. But for a beginner, this may not apply at all. In this case, as for watching Ino is advantageous for most situations, but Ino needs to spend a little bit more time watching her meter than she needs to watch Axel, as so many of her better options rely on having that meter available to either respond when he gets around her zoning or continue combos for bigger damage. Optimization is not necessarily key to that matchup, but if you have to choose a place to put your focus, there's a lot of time that you can spend once you've started to block Axel's attacks, where you're not really looking for an opening anymore, you're just waiting for them to stop. Whereas watching Jam is more a matter of deciding when and how to get out of her way. Even if you can counter her, usually highly mobile characters have extra tricks they can use once you've gotten used to a particular approach. And most players of such characters have a decent concept of the risks they're in, and therefore will take risks early where they can't be hurt too badly, and try to trick you or hold back on them altogether once they've either gotten a life lead or recognized that you have enough meter to convert into something bigger. Most most of us learn fairly early to respace ourselves using our buttons and the longer pushback of the ones that you like the best. This can be good if you feel you have a controlled situation in which to use them, but also leads to the opponent eventually just mashing faster and faster buttons in the hopes of doing certain things. This is great if you have a pressure situation in which you've chosen to keep quiet long enough for this to work. But there are quite a few other situations where this is not going to work out for you, simply because you have to either approach or move away in a way that the opponent can take advantage of. To put that another way, it's fine to use heavy buttons and similar to push your opponent away from you after you have chosen not to continue pressure, block for a moment, and realize that they were not the ones to take any action or make any mistake. It's less useful to use these buttons as a way out of situations where you ended up close, your opponent for whatever reason flinched and did not attempt a punish, and now you want to get away from them. In that situation, in most games, even if your backdash is poor and short range, you should generally still make that your first option. I actually bring this up because of an exception to this rule. Ino is not that type of character. Ino can respace herself using buttons from close because she has sequences she can hit that the opponent can't do much about. This goes back to what we were talking about before. If as a player you have learned to deal with a situation in a particular way, it is possible for your brain to make that connection very directly, and that can be a problem when you later find yourself in the same spacing or same overall situation, but your standard response is not working anymore. You might be able to stop yourself from having it, but quickly installing a new reaction might be difficult. Or, similarly, you might be so disconnected from recognizing the exact problem with the situation that it just happens over and over again. We aim to resolve this by watching the situation itself and simply trying to mentally connect that recognition to a specific concept of what needs to be done. Not necessarily to hit this button, but to attack here for whatever reason, or to defend at this spot for another reason. So in this case, if one had observed the ranges at which Ino has trouble getting away from other characters from close, specifically rather than reacting to that particular situation. It would be easier to switch in a new sequence of buttons intended to help her push herself out, as your autopilot would not be as likely to override you or make you flinch, since what you are reacting to is not a reaction that is wired to press this button at this time in this space, but rather a specific thing you want to see happen. This can in fact be difficult for zoner players, because when a character has less close range defense, it becomes much harder to feel comfortable just watching space, because if you don't react in time, there's always the chance that you'll just get ejected from your optimal situation by a quick opponent approach. So let's look at it from this side. Jam's obvious goal is to get in on Axel at least a bit and deal some damage, because she needs to build up her tension rate gain in order to keep him under control in one way or the other. Even though she doesn't really use a lot of supers or similar in this matchup, having enough meter to do green block approaches, dead angle attacks if absolutely necessary, or blitzes can kinda matter. After landing one attack though, the thing she has to ask herself is, what do I want to happen in this space? Now, a frontal attack on Axel, and in fact a lot of his better blocking spaces, result in Jam not being able to continue her combos at all, and when she can, it's really obvious most of the time. But as the Jam player, you still have to decide whether or not you're going to try to do certain things. But right there we have the possibility of being out of position enough to recognize I should just go for throw on landing, because my opponent is expecting to be able to block even if they got hit by the first jumping hit. Since Axel has relatively long recovery on some of his moves, and Jam moves quite quickly, the player mostly just holds block and doesn't have time to confirm whether or not Jam actually hit the air attack button unless their awareness is higher. Meaning that if they see Jam incoming, there's the possibility that they'll just have gotten hit and are better off blocking whatever follows due to range. And there's the possibility they've gotten hit, were too close, and Jam will finish her combo anyway. However, as the Jam player, I can recognize entirely, I'm not going to land this, they're going to block. So I'm just not going to attack and then throw them when I land because they're blocking. Obviously, throws can be tech, and similar things are always possible, but it's not always about throws. Sometimes it's about walking back, which is where things like empty jump low come from. This works in most games because you must block standing for aerial moves, which means you're effectively just holding back on the stick and not defending yourself from those. This is in fact why empty jump low is quote-unquote a mix-up. The opponent has to recognize that you did not land an attack, or even intend one, shift from that to whatever they choose to do right away, which is often just blocking, and if their reaction was a little too slow in some way, then they get hit with the low most of the time. It's particularly difficult in high stress situations because when a player is stressed, they're focused so heavily on defending the jump, even if they can't anti-air, and whatever pressure follows it, then it's a little bit easier to catch them. So, for example, they might be prepared to tech a throw, but between being prepared to tech a throw, recognizing that you failed the anti-air or can't anti-air in time, realizing your opponent's status of meter and all of that, there's a decent chance sometimes that you can just jump in, do nothing, and hit your low button. The particular forms of air movement in Guilty Gear make this a little less likely, but it's at least somewhat mitigated by two things. The first is that most of the characters who don't have particularly good air movement also have longer lows. And the second thing is the opponent can never be absolutely sure what exactly you've gone into the air for, as a regular jump gives you a lot of options, and for certain characters you can even double jump at the last moment, leaving them more confused. Taking this back to the question of how zoners need to deal with this sort of thing. Zoning is always best done by people who are willing to do rote things for a long time. Basically, once you've reached the point that zoning is automatic, you're just watching yourself do it and watching your opponent try to get through it. Observation of the opponent then becomes an easy task because you're not thinking about the zoning anymore, you're just executing it. When you're put under stress and feel as if you must change your zoning rhythm in order to keep an opponent out, You have two ways of dealing with this. You can try to watch every wiggle they make at the other end of the screen, or mid-screen, depending, and react to each of them. Or you can try to only observe when they actually approach through your zoning and see if you have any options at that moment. Most games, zoners are designed to have said options. They're just harder to execute under pressure. Therefore, you get better aim out of lessening the pressure than you do about changing your game plan. Nearly no modern fighting game will give you a zoner character that cannot hold their own with some quick response move, or can't space themselves to where the opponent basically has to put up with it. The whole in most modern zoner play is the opponent being very daring and making the biggest of reads, or them managing to convince you that it's time to launch a zoning attack, then it's not. And that is easier to do the other way. Depending on your character's zoning tools, of course, this can require more setup. There are definitely games where zoning is a whole process of looking for the right moment to charge up something else to get more out of your zoning style attack, and so on. But even those can be learned to the level where they are routine, and generally, most characters are not designed to be quickly or easily punished for doing this. Part of the complication of the Jam-Ino matchup is in fact the fact that Jam can parry out of a lot of things. But Jam's parry is not actually that fast. Compared to most parry characters in games, hers is more of a I'd usually plus and sometimes I'd stop attacking. since so many of us have a general reaction to Jam's attacking to mash out with our quickest button, it means that a small gap or a small failure in her pressure or her spacing can lead to the player being pushed into that situation where they will actually get parried by the effort.
戦闘スタイルの異なる相手から学ぶことは実に多い。私の所作もあなたの糧になれば幸いです。ジャムさん、アクセル。シンさんは練れていますか？
Let's take a different approach to spacing for this form of the match. There's obviously the spacing where you're trying to get in on Axel by going over his head. And this can give you a big enough lead, but you probably don't have to do too much else for a little bit. But once you find yourself in this space, against an opponent who has slightly better accuracy, life gets difficult. This isn't to say that the jumps wouldn't be the same. After all, you could still green block your way in at least somewhat. But you do need to also think about how to use this puffball. Because it changes the way the opponent thinks about the match. Therefore, your goal could be to maximize the spacing between you and Axel such that Jam can use this attack to move forward, and given its relatively quick extension of a strike zone, i.e. a forward hitbox, most of Axel's responses will be caught by it. Without Jam being in a space where Axel is likely to hit the button or make the attack before he sees her move. Ino has a similar capacity in this matchup. While she does not move forward with most of her attacks, she can still use some of hers in similar ways. But just like Jam, she has to do two sides of the same thing. Convincing the opponent that one option is going to hurt them, or at least be a threat, and then making them deal with the other, is standard fighting game practice. By forcing Axel to be ready to react to her forward sliding move at max range, she's able to land a lot more other stuff in lane neutral. Most people respond to consistent challenges like this, something that feels like it's testing them that they should be able to do this thing or that thing, by continuing to try. Other players give up entirely. Understanding which your opponent is the key to helping understand to yourself which method to take. If they keep on getting discouraged and not managing to stop the move at all, if you were doing it at max range before where it didn't give you a lot of advantage, you might be able to slip in a couple closer versions where you get advantage from it, even if maybe it's blocked. As the opponent's mindset when they see the move may have shifted. On the opposing side, they must train to recognize which spacings do which things, so that they end up thinking, okay, at least if they're going to say, I'm giving up, I don't have the reaction, they end up saying this in response to a specific range or form of the move, rather than just going, I'm done, whenever I see that move, I'm just going to stop. But until they prove that to you, and even after they have to some extent, you can just continue anyway. It's particularly helpful because this move builds up a lot of risk meter on most characters, meaning that Ino can, if she gets to space this move right and keep going, just keep on making you block it. Experimenting with your moves based on your instinct is a good way to build up skills like this. Rather than worrying that you did the wrong move, pay attention to why and how you got punished, just in case you might be able to sometimes glean a little bit from it. Don't just give up because it looks like you got punished. Try to figure out whether or not you somehow hit the move incorrectly, too close, or whatever, because there was a reason you tried to do it, and it was probably that you thought it would work. So if you find yourself saying, I thought that would work, there's a decent chance that it does work, and it just needs to be spaced differently. or done in a reaction to a different opponent's action. This may seem unnecessary, and at lower levels it can often be. Opponents with particular skills will either leave you safe or not safe, but it starts to get a little more stressful at higher levels, where things you have learned to depend on, suddenly your opponent is so perfectly spacing themselves or knows some aspect of the game, trick, or matchup that makes it possible to punish you or put you in a bad situation for something you're used to being a good idea. At that point, without the skill set mentally to recognize why the thing is happening, even while continuing to do it calmly, you may find yourself completely unable to make the adaptation. And this is one of the most important things separating intermediate from high, intermediate, and higher players. You can also manage fairly well if someone is there to tell you, hey, you counter that with that, and so on. But learning to do it on your own, or at least try to do it on your own, is more likely to help outright, especially when the person giving you your advice, or who hasn't given you any advice yet, doesn't necessarily know that well directly. And it is entirely possible. As much as this game can be quite popular enough that you'd expect that if you go to a tournament most people have experience, remember that each person playing comes from their own little microcosm of the world, the same as you do. If you haven't gone to a lot of tournaments, this sort of thing can be really stressful because you'll find yourself in that state. Amara, for example, found herself in that situation at Red Bull Conquest, where not only had she never fought the opposing Raven claimed that they had never fought a same player. You can guess how that went.
色気の武器に頼りすぎね。そんなのいつまで
イノさん、アクセル。シンさんは寝れていますか？気負い畳むよう親善試合第一開始。こいつでやるぜ。あらよ、使ってんじゃねえ。食らっとけ。使ってんじゃねえ。ねや食らっとけ。食らっとけ。あらさ。こいつでやるぜ。あらして。親善試合第2、勝者は1人。
まだ役に入りきらんね。
イノさん、勝利大勝。
テヌートが売りなのね。でもちょっと長すぎるわ。何事も程度が重要なの。
シンさんは寝れていますか？全力で来ることだ。気負い畳むよう親善試合第一開始。どこにいるのか。使え。 現することだ。解勝利大勝。戦闘スタイルの異なる相手から学ぶことは実に多い。私の所作もあなたの糧になれば幸いです。
The train's stopping early tonight. Various requirements in that they are real life that the rest of us tend to have. I don't know who idea that was. So you can join us tomorrow for more Sandbag Casuals XL content, which is going to be, yet again, a totally inexperienced person jumping into the world of Under Night in Birth gets the latest. On Thursday, we will have our usual Dragon Ball Fighters Lounge Kame House. And on Friday, we have another Dragon Ball Fighters bot form to release. Next Monday, of course, we will be back to our Street Fighter Mishmashing Lounge. And on Tuesday, we will be, of course, back to this. The Tuesday train will pull back into the station with a full 3-hour run, in contrast to this one, which will cut short, basically now. That said, that brings us to an early end to our Tuesday train. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good night, everyone.